Welcome to another FrontEnd Engineering Explained. So let's talk about loops, and specifically loops over arrays. So there's a number of ways that you can loop over an array. There is, for example, map, there's filter, there's reduce, there's sum, there is forEach, there is for loops where you can use for of, and then there's also the old school, to put it in quotes, for loop. We're going to look at using a couple of these to solve a specific challenge here. The challenge is very simple because the focus is on looking at the different ways of looping over the array. All we want to do is loop over our input and find the two numbers in the array that when added together gives us the target. And then what we want to do is we want to return the array indexes of those two numbers. That's it. We'll never have to loop over the array more than once. There will always be two numbers that when added together gives us the target. So we're going to totally focus just on the different ones. So let's start with forEach and see how far we get. So function sum forEach, we're going to call it that, and then my input and my target. Cool, and then we're going to want to call this, and we're going to log out what it returns. So sum forEach, and it's going to take the input and the target, and then what we expect is 0, 2. Why do I say that? Because arrays are 0 indexed, so 0, and then skip over 1, and then 2. So 2 plus 7 gives us 9. So we expect the execution of the function to return this, which is what we log. So my input is going to be our array, so my input.forEach, and forEach loops over each item in the array, and it gets, oops, I meant those. It gets the number. You can also get the index, but we're only going to use the number, so we're not going to care about the other. And then now we're looping. All right. So the first thing we want to do is we want to store a value called isSolved. And what this should be is we're going to take my input 0, which is the first item in our array. We're going to add it with number, which is the current item. And we're going to ask, is that equal to target? Now, here's something to consider. The first time we go through this loop, we're going to add 2 to itself. In our case here, it's okay. We probably actually don't want to do that. We probably don't want to add 2 to itself because, we want to add our current one to one of the other values in the array. There's no real way for us to avoid this using forEach. Because even if we get the index, that's not going to really help us. Even if we say something like, when we go into the loop, the first thing we check is whether my input 0 is equal to number, and then somehow exit out of this loop iteration, like using continue. There's no way of doing that in forEach. We are going to go through each item in the array. So now we want to check our base case, which is solved, and then we want to do something. Again, we can't return here because there's no way to return out of this forEach. So we have to store our solution in yet another variable. So we'll do const match, and we'll start it off as an empty array. And then in here we'll say match.push, and what we want to push is my input.index of my input 0, so that's the 2, and then we want to say my input, and here I'm going to say last index of number, which is the current one we're looping through. And the reason I'm saying last index of is, while this is not foolproof, what if this and this is the same number, right? If you don't say last index of, it might return the same index twice. So that's a little bit better. Not perfect. It can still be buggy because what if there's 3 numbers? But let's move on from that. And then in the end, we can return if there is match.length. So there's something in the array, then we want to return match. Else we are going to return null, which means we've gone through the entire array, found no matches. Okay, so let's see. Let me go live here. Just going to open this in a separate tab, which I don't want, and then I'm going to refresh here. And so there we can see array 02. That's exactly what we were expecting. And then if we go in here and we say console.log is solved, not saved, you can see that we go through each item of the array. Even though we've hit our base case here, we're still going another iteration, and we're getting our result here, our expected result. So that's good, but we've gone over more of the array than we wanted to. For example, let's say we move 7 here and 15 here and run. You can see even though we've hit our base case here already, we're still going over 2 more items in the array. Of course, our result is now different because we've moved our indexes. So let's move them back. All right, so next. The next one feels like a bit of a hack. Feels like I should be wearing a cowboy hat or a pirate hat or something like that when we're doing this one. And basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to use array.some. So what that does is as soon as the callback function returns true, it exits the array and it exits the loop and goes to the next statement to execute. Because what sum is supposed to do is you're saying, I don't care if there is 10 matches in the array. I only want to know as soon as there's 1 match, return, and then I'm happy. I just want to know if there's a match in this array. So whether there's 1 or 10, doesn't matter. If there's at least 1, you can return. So we're going to kind of hijack that to see if that helps us a little bit with, continuing through iterating, even though we've already hit our base case. By the way, I'm pulling out target from outside, so I'm not using the one that's been passed in. So let's just fix that real quick. And I think that was the only place. Yes. Okay. So moving on. Sum, and then my input, my target. Okay. So right. So what we want to do is my input dot sum, and it's again going to get the number, and then we can do our stuff. But now what we want to do is we're still going to have this, right? So we're still going to do the same thing here, but now remember, again, we can't just return, and the return statement will be what is returned by the function, because we need to return true or false so that the loop knows whether it needs to continue or whether it's found a match and therefore needs to return out. There's a bit of a nicety here that we can use, small win, in that this will return true or false. So we can say has match equals like that, right? So if it found a match, this will be true. If it went through the entire array, found no matches, this will be false. We're going to go ahead and log this again. And then we're going to do the same thing here. So if solved, we're going to push that stuff into match, which means we also need this guy. So we're going to move it down here, right? So now we have const match, we have an empty array, blah, 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 blah. But we also need to return true here. Return true to tell the loop, hey, we found a match, you can exit. And else we want to return false to say, no match yet, keep going, right? And then we want to do something similar to what we did over here, but we're going to change it a little bit. So instead of checking the length of the array, we're going to say if has match, return match, else return null. So now we're going to call sum over here. And here we can see we have false, false, true, we don't have that one additional one, and we're getting our correct output. Let's call both. Some for each. Go. So we can see false, false, true. One more false. Then we get our return false, false, true. So we've solved one thing. But you have to ask yourself the question, do you find this to be more readable or less readable to the previous one? I think they're almost even. So maybe this is a win. Let's move on. So the next type of loop we're going to use is a for loop, but we're going to use the for of syntax. So let's go ahead and create the function sum for of. Same thing, my input, my target, and there we go. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to say for const number of my input. Now here we can't get in access to the index. Therefore, again, we don't have a way of saying of skipping that first one, but we kind of do. I hinted at that one earlier. So if we use my input 0, then we can say if my input 0 is equal to number, so the one going through, so the first time we go through, these will match, we're going to say continue. So what continue does is it just moves the for loop to the next iteration. So anything that comes after this will not be executed. It'll just move on to the next execution of the loop. And so now we're not going to bother to even do this bit there. We'll do this over here. So checking if my input 0 plus number is equal to my target. We'll bring our console log over here as well, so we can see what happens there. We're going to check our base case, which is solved. And if we've reached our base case, we're going to return exactly what we expect to be returned. So my input dot index of my input 0, and nope, not there. My input dot last index of number, and if we didn't, we're going to return null. So there we go. So we're going through our loop. We're skipping over the first one because of this. So we are continuing, and now we're checking our base case. We're logging false. So we're going through the loop again. We're returning, and here we are returning out of the function. So this becomes the return of the actual function down here. So if we didn't find a match, we would see this return null. But because we are finding a match, we are seeing 0.2, which is the expected. So this is kind of starting to be a little bit nicer. I mean, if you compare it to the previous ones, we're saying for a number of input, if my input is equal to number, continue, don't do anything else, basically check if we've met our base case yet, if we have return. If not, after we've gone through the entire array, return null. So there's one more left, and that is, as I mentioned, the old school for loop. So function sum for my input, my target, and here we go. So for let I equals, I'm going to put 0 here, but I'm going to change this in a second. Here we're basically caching the length of the array into the variable L. So if your array is really long, then each time it doesn't have to recalculate or get the property again. We've already stored it, so we can just do I less than L, and then we're incrementing it, right? And then I'm going to change this to 1. And by doing that, I'm automatically skipping the first one. So I'm replacing this here. Then we can pretty much just copy this over, and we can bring this over here as well. And then let's put some 4 in there. Number is, aha, so here is the one thing. So we're using number here, but of course now what we need to do is my input and then I, so the index, and then the same here, my input, I. And there we go. False, true, as soon as we have a match, we exit out. So to my mind, this is the cleanest, fastest one of all of our options that we've looked at so far. And this is the version of the for loop that's been around in JavaScript since the beginning. And this shows you that sometimes it might be that some of the older JavaScript functions is still very, very, very effective. To me, this reads really easily. We're saying that I equals 1, which means we're starting at the second index of the array. We're just caching the length of the array in L. You can write this a little different, I'll show in a second. Then we're just comparing. Is I less than L? If it is, go into the array, test if we've met our base case. If we have, return the expected return value. If not, go through the loop again and keep doing that until we've either matched our base case, or if we haven't, we return null. So how you can write this a little different is you can do this. So you basically leave this part off and you put it on this side. The only difference is now every time you go through the loop, the JavaScript interpreter needs to read the value of the length property off of the array. Now, back in the day, this used to be a performance gain, a slight performance gain, especially if you have very, very large arrays that you're looping through. So, it's really up to you to decide whether it's worth writing this syntax or whether this is good enough. In most cases, you're probably going to be just fine with that. Your end result is going to be exactly the same. So if we take this and we stick it in there and we run, we've gotten exactly the same result. Nothing's changed. So I hope you found this interesting. Any other ideas or how you might approach this kind of problem? Any other loops maybe that I didn't think of? Maybe another approach. Of course, you could also use something like recursion, but I didn't want to look at that in this video. So consider your options. There is a reason that there are multiple different ways to loop over an array. It is not just that the language has evolved over time. It is actually valuable. So take a look at the different options and consider the best one for the job. Till the next one, if you like this, give it a thumbs up. Subscribe if you like this content, would like more of it, and I'll speak to you soon. Peace.